History will be made in the Missouri Valley Conference on Saturday, January 31st, as for the first time since 1982, two top 25 teams in the Missouri Valley Conference will meet in regular season play. Wichita State Shockers number 12 and Northern Iowa Panthers number 18 will go head-to-head in Cedar Falls, Iowa at the McLeod Center. But to get you ready for this game, I am excited to bring in ESPN analyst and dear friend of the Missouri Valley Conference, Mr. Mark Adams. Mark, how is it going today, sir?
Good, and a dear friend of Derek Dockett as well. I love what you do with this. I'm really excited to be here because obviously it's a very historic moment for the Missouri Valley Conference and NCAA basketball, and it seems like historic moments, I kind of feel like Forrest Gump. They've kind of followed me around with you guys, so I'm really excited to be there on Saturday.
Yeah, and you know what? This conference has got so much rich history, so much tradition. It's amazing to see some of the things that have happened throughout the course of the 108 years of the Missouri Valley Conference, but we talk about history. We can start right with the Wichita State Shockers, Final Four, undefeated team with one loss to the Kentucky Wildcats. Now they're on a heck of a streak of their own with their consecutive conference win streak.
Derek, they've won 30 consecutive games in the Missouri Valley Conference. Now that sounds like a lot, but let's put it into perspective. Wichita State with their 30 victories, that's the best run in the last 90 to 100 years. You have to go back to when Nebraska and Kansas were in the Missouri Valley Conference. So over the 108-year history of the Missouri Valley, we are witnessing one of the greatest runs of consecutive wins in conference play in the history of the Missouri Valley. And let's think about that. Cincinnati, back in the early 1960s, led by Oscar Robertson and Ron Bonham and Tony Yates and guys like that, they won national titles. They didn't do this. When you look at Larry Bird and the consecutive victories by Indiana State, Larry Bird and Indiana State Sycamores didn't do this. Hersey Hawkins at Bradley, they didn't do this. When you look at what this team has accomplished, last year going 31-0, as you mentioned, and then going to the Final Four the previous year, and then this year, this 30 consecutive win run against Missouri Valley Conference opponents, it is just a tremendous feat by Greg Marshall and his bunch, and they have been dominating and doing it as well. So we are truly witnessing history right now in the Missouri Valley.
Yeah, and the more impressive thing is everyone talks about how difficult it is to win on the road, especially when you get to conference play. In the Missouri Valley, we play that double round robin. Everyone gets to see it twice, but the Shockers have done it also in their road games as well.
You know, we talk about the Shockers playing angry, Derek. They have road rage on the road. I mean, this is a team that's now won 13 consecutive Missouri Valley road games. Now, to put that into perspective, again, we're talking about an historic run of proportions that run over decades and decades and decades. 13 consecutive wins for Wichita State. They're also the #1 road team in the country over the last 5 seasons. And so this is a team that has a toughness about them. And frankly, I'm envious. As a former coach, you know, I was driving around today kind of thinking about what we were going to talk about. And I thought about it from a coaching perspective, that if someday I said that my team won 13 consecutive road games, what a tremendous feat by this Wichita State team. I'm envious of Greg Marshall. As a former coach, I am envious of Greg Marshall and what his team has done. He's the best coach in the country right now. When you put all the numbers together, and I know we got Coach K at 1K. I understand that. Great coach. But I believe that right now, that Greg Marshall is the best basketball coach in the country.
Yeah, well, it's impressive what they've been able to do in their, what's quite frankly, when you think about it, a short amount of time. I mean, a couple years of play, but these guys have put together a heck of a run. All right, we're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we've got more. We're going to talk about the Shockers' four-headed monster and how Mark Adams will compare Wichita State to another nationally impressive team in Wisconsin. We'll come back as we prepare for the Wichita State Shockers and Northern Iowa Panthers on Saturday, a big game in the Missouri Valley Conference.
Do you remember?
He shoots from the horn. Good! Good! And Jackson hit the shot!
Do you remember?
Southern celebrates its third NCAA tournament appearance in the last 3 years.
Celebrate 25 years of Arch Madness. Don't miss the 2015 Missouri Valley Conference Men's Basketball Tournament, March 5th through 8th at the Scott Trade Center. Get your tickets and get to St. Louis for Arch Madness.
The Shockers will go to the NCAA 34-0.
Welcome back, everybody, as we visit with Mark Adams here on abcsports.com and Missouri Valley Conference on YouTube, preparing everybody for the big game on Saturday between Wichita State and Northern Iowa. Mark, everyone knows all about the Shockers and how they've been able to put all these wins together, but the team, when we look at the core of the Shockers team, there are some guys on that squad that have really impressed national folks all across the country.
Well, here's how I evaluate a true team, Derek. When you look at Wichita State, we all know about Fred VanVleet and how effective he is at distributing the basketball. Over the last 7 games, he's had 42 assists and only 8 turnovers. 42 assists and 8 turnovers. Now, that's impressive by any stretch of the imagination. He's playing like an All-American guard. But you know what? I got kind of curious about why this team is so good and how unselfish they are. Then I started looking at Takale Cotton to look at his assist-to-turnover ratio. He also has one that's 2.0 assist to 1 turnover ratio, actually above that. He's so good at distributing the ball. You don't think that about Takale Cotton. We think about him as a defender. We think about this big athlete that goes through and just drives it home. But he is a great passer as well. So then I thought, well, there's 2 guys like that. What about Baker? Baker, known as a great shooter, right? Can knock down the 3, has added his ability to go put the ball on the floor and score with it. He also is plus 2 to 1 assist-to-turnover ratio. So now I had a story, right? There's 3 guys on the Shockers that all have 2 to 1 or better assist-to-turnover ratios. So I started researching across the country. How many teams have 3 guys that have a 2.0 to 1 assist-to-turnover ratio? Turns out there's a handful of them. But you know what? Then there was the X factor, the bodyguard, and Evan Wessel. Evan Wessel also is a guy that distributes well. He's got better than a 2 assist to 1 turnover ratio as well. 4 starters for Wichita State all have an assist to turnover ratio that's plus 2. No other team in the country can say that. I mean, Derek, we talked about the history of this team, but what about the present of this team? And it's about those 4 guys who distribute the ball so well. And Darius Carter, he's having a career year. Why? Because those guys get into gaps, 2-foot jump stop, they make smart plays. And if there's one thing I've seen of a difference in Fred VanVleet in particular, from early in the conference season, non-conference season to today, he gets in the gap, he gets into open spaces and stops and makes a play, either makes a shot or dishes it. Before he's going straight to the rim, and his assist-to-turnover ratio wasn't as good. But 42 assists to 8 turnovers over the last 7 games, Fred VanVleet's been unbelievable. And those 4, they represent the most unselfish team in America.
Yeah, that's impressive. That's really good stuff there. Now, you informed me earlier that you wanted to compare the Shockers to a high major program that you found some interesting things about.
Well, when you think about toughness, if I were to ask you about toughness, who are the toughest teams in the country? I think Virginia would certainly come to mind. Wichita State would come to mind. I think Northern Iowa would also come to mind. But another one that came to mind for me was Wisconsin. And I think that Bo's Bunch versus Marshall's Law is an interesting comparison. When you look at assist-to-turnover ratio, they really line up well. When you look at turnovers per game, they really line up well. When you talk about rebound percentage, Wichita State a little bit better in that category. When you talk about points given up per game, I mean, those 2 teams, when you look at them defensively and then how they share the ball and their toughness, those 2 teams really align well. Wisconsin, number 3 in the country right now. And I think as we talked about that toughness of going on the road and winning, you know, Bo Ryan, never can you question the toughness of a Wisconsin Badger team. And I think Wichita State embodies that same type of toughness, that same selflessness that we see from Wisconsin, but also we see that tough rebounding, defensive-minded team. I think those are the 2 teams in the top 15 that really kind of mirror each other in certain ways, and I think it's an interesting comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how the Shockers can use their toughness against Northern Iowa team, defensive-minded with their own brand of toughness. So, but when we come back, we're going to turn our attention to those Northern Iowa Panthers. We're going to talk about Seth Tuttle and some of the things that are the keys for the Panthers this year as they've gotten back into that defensive intensity that they've been known for. Stay tuned with us, everybody. We'll be back with more as we prepare for the Shockers and the Panthers on ESPN2 this Saturday.
Hey, basketball fans. The Missouri Valley Tournament in St. Charles, Missouri is coming soon. Make your team the home team at the MVC Tournament and get great seats for as little as $12 a session. Just $12. Don't miss the 2015 Missouri Valley Conference Women's Basketball Tournament, March 12th through 15th at Family Arena. Get your tickets and get to St. Charles now.
Welcome back, everybody, to our little pregame show here on ABCSports.com and the Missouri Valley Conference on YouTube. Derek Dockett here, visiting with Missouri Valley Conference analyst and ESPN analyst Mark Adams, preparing for the Shockers and the Panthers on ESPN2 this Saturday. Don't forget you watch that game on the Watch ESPN app as well. But we've been talking about the Shockers. We know their history, their team. Let's turn our attention to the Panthers now. Really putting it together, a press start. Really taking advantage of the depth of their team. But Seth Tuttle, it starts right there with the guy you call the Teenage Mutant Ninja Tuttle, right?
He's a mutant five-man. I mean, how many guys in the country at 6'8" lead their team in assists? He's one of only 2 guys in the country, 6'8" or better, that average 3.2 assists or better. The other guy, some guy named Niang at Iowa State. So there's a little bit of a tussle going on in the state of Iowa right now as to who is the best 6'8" guy, and their numbers align quite nicely. But Seth Tuttle's a very unusual big guy in that I tracked the last game that I did against Illinois State, and we tracked how many times Seth Tuttle gets the ball on a percentage basis for every possession that takes place during the game. He touches the ball, Derek, 95%. Wow. Of their possessions. How many big guys in the country touch the ball on 95% of their team's touches? Usually they're down the block and just hoping somebody passes them the ball. But the way Northern Iowa uses Seth Tuttle is a very smart way to use Seth Tuttle because he's been making 3 balls, especially in non-conference play. Not as effective in conference. He's only been shooting about 30% from 3 in conference play, but still a respectable enough shooter where a big guy like a Gideus Miscavicius, who's a great shot blocker in the Valley, or a Darius Carter is going to have to come out and guard him. And that's where Seth Tuttle is most dangerous because he can put the ball on the floor, he can do 2-foot jump stop, and like a point guard, he makes good point guard decisions. So he's like a 0.5 man. That's why I call him a mutant, because he's just simply different than any other 5-man in the country. Then you look at his career stats. He has over 1,500 points and over 800 rebounds. Now, to put that in perspective, remember Kyle Weems? Pretty good player. Remember Doug McDermott? Best player in the country last year. Remember Eric Coleman from Northern Iowa? Awfully good player. I mean, when you look at the company that this kid has with 1,500 points and 800 rebounds for his career, it is so impressive. Jackie Carmichael from Illinois State, also a part of that elite group. And so this is a guy that not only scores, but can defend. He can assist. He's very efficient. He's the only guy 6'8" or better in the country that shoots 75% from the free throw line, 61% from the floor, and averages over 3 assists per game. That is a mutant Ninja Tuttle in my book. I love the way that he's played, and he's a really good kid, too. He comes from a solid family. He's very well-spoken, very respectful. It's hard not to root for a guy like Seth Tuttle.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to throw something else out at you. We didn't talk about this before, but one thing that's impressed me with the Panthers that doesn't get a whole lot of attention, but they've got some really good, accurate outside shooters. Matt Bohannon, Nate Buss is the big 3 for them at Illinois State to win the game last weekend. Is that one of those X factor things that when it comes down to it, something down the stretch in a game like this or in a game in the NCAA tournament where that can really prove to be a valuable weapon for them?
Derek, I love you. I just want you to know that. I love you. That's a great point. Let's reflect back to a game in 2010 in the Sweet 16 when Northern Iowa knocked off Kansas. Ali Farouk-Manesh, who wasn't the best player on that team. He was certainly a very good player, a great shooter, best shooter on that team, but not the best player. And he took the biggest shot, I think we could probably say, in Northern Iowa history when he made that big 3. And Derek, you are dead on. there are going to be X-factor guys beyond Seth Tuttle, beyond a Fred VanVleet, beyond a Ron Baker that make plays in this game. Matt Bohannon, for a while, struggled from three. The good news for Northern Iowa fans, Matt Bohannon's starting to make shots now. Wyatt Lohaus, he's a freshman, comes off the bench, but he can be so dangerous, has a very high basketball IQ. His dad played at Iowa, everybody knows that. And this kid really can shoot the basketball. And especially in a game where you're talking about elite defensive teams that give up maybe 50 points a game, man, if you can get an open three and then drain that three, a guy like Bohannon, a guy like Lohaus, they could be huge X factors in this game.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Now you mentioned X factors. You have these play angry points that you always like to bring up. Let's focus on those for this game. What are going to be some of those keys? What are going to be those factors and those play angry points when the Shockers and the Panthers get together this weekend?
If you ever have a chance to beat Wichita State, you've got to outplay them in three specific categories. Number one, points in the paint. Number two, points off turnovers. And number three, second chance points. In conference play, we evaluated both of these teams. Now, Wichita State has a slight advantage in those categories versus their opponents in the Missouri Valley. But Northern Iowa is no slouch in that category as well. And when you look at the graphic, basically what you see is that in Missouri Valley Conference play, both these teams start off the game against their opponents, about 8 or 9 to nothing, based upon their ability to manufacture points in the paint, second chance points, and points off turnovers. So Northern Iowa does not take a back seat to anybody in the Valley, and they will compete well with Wichita State in this stat category. And if you're going to beat the Shockers, you better come with your lunch pail, your work boots, and you better come with a little bit of chip on your shoulder. I think back to Northern Iowa and Lucas O'Rear. He's one of the toughest kids I ever watched play in a Panther uniform. They better bring that Lucas O'Rear attitude if they expect to beat Wichita State, which I believe they can. But it's going to be that lunch pail, that work ethic, that nastiness of getting inside and doing the dirty work. Carter versus Tuttle, how's that going to work out? How about Singleton? Marvin Singleton's a guy that really likes to get physical. You don't run the offense through Marvin Singleton. He just finishes the offense by going and getting the basketball. He's going to be another guy to keep an eye on as to whether or not he can manufacture some extra points for a team that needs them to knock off Wichita State, who's been on this historic run.
Yeah. You just said historic run. Now, what some people don't realize is that both of these teams, UNI and Wichita State, have been on quite a run since Christmas.
Defensively. When you talk about college basketball today, there's two great stories in college basketball. It's Kentucky, not their offense, it's Kentucky's defense. It has been stifling. Then you talk about Virginia, not their offense, it's been their defense. And they play that boa constrictor defense where they just squeeze the life out of you. I've seen tremendous similarities between Wichita State's defense and Northern Iowa's defense. And when you compare those two, 1 and 2 in the country, versus number 12 and 18 in the country, when you look at points per game and how they align with Wichita State and Northern Iowa and Kentucky and Virginia, take a look at that. Those are startling defensive numbers and holding their opponents down around 50 points per game. Then you look at defensive field goal percentage, it's the same story. Kentucky's been dominant in that area. But look at Northern Iowa and Wichita State. Both those teams holding their opponents in that mid to low 30% range. So these are two greatly skilled defensive teams. Ben Jacobson, to me, is the best defensive technician in the country. Now, what do I mean by that? I like his defensive footwork and their off-ball positioning. As you watch this game as a Missouri Valley Conference fan, don't watch the ball. Watch off the ball. That will tell you the story as to who's stopping who. And Wichita State, one of the best teams in America, year in and year out, at holding their opponents to one shot. Not many second chance points opportunities when you play Wichita State. They're a little bit more physical, I think, than Northern Iowa defensively. Takale Cotton, very physical. Darius Carter, very physical. Fred VanVleet, really physical from the point position. Ron Baker as well. Northern Iowa is going to have to meet that physicality and exceed it as well in order to win this basketball game. But Derek, this is a toss-up. It's going to be a nut house at the McLeod Center. It's going to be McLeod Madness on Saturday in front of a national TV audience on ESPN2. This is one of the most historic games ever in Missouri Valley Conference history. I had the privilege of calling the 31-0 regular season finale for Wichita State last year, and I was the most honored guy in the country to do it. And I'm going to be the most honored guy on Saturday as well. You know how much I love the Valley, and the bottom line is I get to call this game, and I'm proud to be a part of it, and I'm thrilled to see these two teams doing so well because I told you in the preseason, the Missouri Valley Conference is back. Do you doubt me now? Two nationally ranked teams going at each other for the first time in the regular season since 1982. Wichita State on an historic run, the best run of Missouri Valley Conference wins, 30 in a row, 13 in a row on the road. You got to go back 90, 100 years to see that. Northern Iowa, back in the NCAA tournament in 2010, knocked off Kansas, the Sweet 16. They are back, baby. They're playing great defense. And this is as exciting of a game as you're going to see on Saturday on ESPN2. And I want to personally invite all of your listeners, all of your watchers, every Missouri Valley Conference fan, tune into history on Saturday.
Yeah, it's going to be huge. I mean, there's nowhere else to put it. It's just going to be huge. Just want to remind everyone, there is a full slate of Missouri Valley Conference action on Saturday, January 31st. Starts with Bradley, Indiana State at 12. Illinois State will take on the resurgent Loyola Ramblers this year. Milton Doyle now sidelined with a little bit of injury, but the Ramblers have been impressive. That'll be our NBC TV network game of the week, 1 p.m. from Chicago. Evansville will take on Drake. You'll see that Wichita State Northern Iowa game we've been talking about on ESPN2, 3 p.m. And Southern Illinois and Missouri State will be available on ESPN3 that evening at 7 o'clock. Mark Adams, this has been fun. It's going to be a great game. You enjoy yourself in Cedar Falls and sign a lot of autographs and you know what? Just have those folks enjoy it.
We're going to have a ball, Derek. Thanks so much for having me on.